All right, well, we will go ahead and get going. Welcome everybody who is watching us live on our Facebook page. My name is Stephen Fearing, and I am a Presbyterian minister and co-founder of the Clergy Emergency League. And we'll give just a really brief introduction on the work that we do at the Clergy Emergency League before I introduce our special neighbor guest today, Tom Junod. The Clergy Emergency League was founded in June of this year, a few months ago. And to give a little bit of the background of who we are, back in the 1930s, there was a guy by the name of Adolf Hitler who rose to power in Germany, and he had a knack of using Christianity to try to further his policies of violence and oppression. And a lot of Christians in Germany thought that he was a great guy, and they did not see any problem with giving their allegiance to Adolf Hitler. They did not see any problem with the policies of the Third Reich and the gospel of Jesus Christ. Well, not all Christians saw it that way. A group of Christians had the audacity to say that no, it is not okay, that Adolf Hitler and his policies are in fact blatantly antithetical to the gospel of Jesus Christ as we read it. And they got together and formed a resistance movement and ended up writing a confession that we call the Barmen Declaration. But anyways, this group of pastors in 1930s Germany called themselves the Pastors Emergency League. And here we are in 2020, and in that spirit, we have created something called the Clergy Emergency League, which is simply a grassroots group of clergy we are seeking to support and to learn from one another in this crazy, this very divisive, volatile atmosphere, and trying to figure out how we can be true to our callings as preachers and to speak into those spaces to our congregants. So in that light, seeking to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly, as Micah 6:8 teaches us, we have invited my friend Tom. So Tom, welcome. Grateful to have you with us. I'm hoping this is less of an interview and more of just kind of a conversation. Tom,
I hope so too. It's great to be with you, Stephen. I miss you.
I know, miss you too.
Stephen and I know each other through when Stephen was a pastor in Shelter Island, New York. We've had Stephen over to dinner a bunch of times. I've been to his house for dinner and his incredible smoked concoctions. And I miss you and Trisha.
For the record, those smoked concoctions were food. Just make sure everybody want to know that. We first met when I think it was the summer of 2014, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And for the record, I still don't. But I was fresh out of seminary. I had just gotten out of seminary, and that was my first call. And got to know you and your wonderful wife Janet and daughter Nia. And it was during this time that I learned that I was getting to know you, that you had a relationship, a friendship with Fred Rogers, and that was a friendship that has changed your life. You write that he is the first. You are an artist of words, a writer, and you have interviewed, I'm sure, countless people. But he was the first, or so you say, that became your friend from interviewing him. So for those who might be unfamiliar, would you please just kind of share with us, how did you first cross paths with Mr. Rogers?
Well, sure. I was working for Esquire magazine at the time, and I was about a year into that job. I had come from GQ, where everything just was roses when I was at GQ. Everything went so well. I mean, I really, I was in the habit of topping myself as a journalist. Like, what was he going to do this time? And really, setting up that expectation for myself. And so when I went to Esquire, I put tremendous pressure on myself to because I'd come to Esquire with some fanfare. And so I put tremendous pressure on myself to do exactly what I've been doing at GQ, but even take it further. And so for my first story at Esquire, I wrote about Kevin Spacey, the actor. And for my next trick, I with coy rhetorical devices that gave me an out, but really didn't. I outed him,
Mhm.
and man, my winning streak ended all in one shot. It was a reviled journalistic stunt, and all the momentum that I had been building at GQ sort of died, and I lost my confidence, and I lost my confidence in myself. I lost, when you're a journalist, when you lose people's trust, you realize what an underrated commodity trust is. And when you lose trust in
Mm.
yourself, you realize what an underrated commodity trust is.
I imagine there's many pastors that have learned that as
Right,
well. Sure.
right. And then so about a year later, when I was really struggling and really trying to find my way, how do you keep on topping yourself when you've topped yourself right into the tank?
Mm.
What do you do? I was assigned to write about Fred Rogers, and I did not, I was not a Fred Rogers guy. I was a little bit too old for Fred Rogers, and
Yeah.
when I think that I was about 12 when he went, big and national around the same time as Sesame Street. And, for me, for a 12-year-old boy, this guy with the sweater and the sneakers was, I think namby-pamby was the word
Mm.
that we
Mm.
we used back then. It was just, who is this guy? He wasn't for you. He was for children.
Mm.
And but I was assigned that story for an issue that we did on American heroes, and the editors and some people at the magazine had gotten into their heads that he was an American hero, and I think that my editor was a wonderful guy. He's a great editor, David Granger, really wanted to see what was going to happen. I think
Mm.
I think he looked at it as the kind of volatile mix that would make good journalism. You had the nicest man in the world meeting bad boy journalist, Tom Junod. And I went, and I don't know if any of you guys have seen It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, the movie with Tom Hanks and Matthew Rhys. It was a little bit different than that, in that I wasn't as angry as Matthew was in the movie, but
You never got into an actual fist fight with your father, correct?
and I never got into an actual fist fight with my dad. But the meeting with Fred was something I'll never forget. I called him from our office in New York, and he
Hmm.
happened to be I happened to be calling him around the block. He had an apartment on 56th Street.
Hmm.
So I walked around the corner and went upstairs, and he had warned me on the phone, Tom, I'm gonna be in my bathrobe. I was trying to take a nap, and I went over there, and sure enough, Mr. Rogers answers the door in his bathrobe, and then I sit down, and he starts asking me, Tom, did you? Because I started asking him about his childhood. Of course, you're going to ask Fred Rogers about his childhood, but he was not interested in answering my questions at all. He was very interested in asking me about my childhood. Tom, did you have a special toy that meant a lot to you? And I was like, yes, Fred. Did that toy have a name? Yes, Fred. What was the name of the toy? Old Rabbit. Oh, I'll bet you had him when he was a very young rabbit. And it just went on, and I'm, you know,
I mean, was that
practically.
was that? I mean, it sounds like to you it was disarming.
Oh,
Uh,
it was disarming. But the thing about Fred is that he had this tremendous natural authority, which
hmm.
is something that the movie captures really well. I mean, you just didn't say no to him. And when he asked you a question, he wasn't just making small talk. He wasn't asking questions for the sake of asking questions. He was asking questions for the sake of getting an answer. And he put you on the spot every
Mm.
single time. And I was there and I'm practically, sobbing, talking about, old Rabbit as this sort of lost piece of childhood innocence. And then and his apartment is quite dark at this time. And he goes, well, wait a second, Tom, because I really like to, introduce Joanne to my new friends. So I'm going to call, I'm going to call Joanne. And he calls Joanne. And when I'm on the phone with Joanne, he goes, can I take your picture, Tom? And he takes this picture of me while I'm talking to Joanne. And it was so disorienting. It was so unlike anything that I had ever gone through that, I mean, the biggest difference between the movie and real life was, I mean, I did know that I had a live one. I mean, it wasn't, I hadn't lost all of my journalistic instincts. I knew that this was going to be a different experience and was quite determined to go for the ride. But that's how it all began. And Fred and I went and wound up seeing Fred. Saw him in New York, saw him the next day, went down to Pennsylvania to see him on the set, went again to see him when he decided to take a drive into Latrobe to show me his house, his childhood house, and also the cemetery where he was gonna be buried. And
Where you
I
saw him?
I saw him again,
right?
after that.
Did he have to excuse himself to go relieve himself?
Yeah. I actually, I mean, I've seen Fred Rogers stark naked in the locker room at the Pittsburgh Athletic Club when he was getting dressed to go swimming, and I've seen Fred Rogers pee.
So having seen Fred Rogers stark naked, you can confirm that he does not have tattoos up and down his arms.
He definitely does not. I think of anybody of all the authorities on Fred, I'm the one most qualified to say he was not tattooed.
Yeah. So you knew Fred. Fred found you.
He did.
In the last 4 years of his life, 4 or 5
Yes.
years of his life.
5 years. It was actually 4. It was 90. It was 98 through 2002.
Yeah. I want to start off a little bit by quoting you in the article that you wrote last year, kind of a revisitation. I think you wrote this for The Atlantic.
It was.
And I just want to read this paragraph that you wrote about Fred towards the end. You say this: as for Fred, it's true that he lost, and that the digitization of all human endeavor has devoured his legacy as eagerly as it has devoured everything else. But that he stands at the height of his reputation 16 years after his death shows the persistence of a certain kind of human hunger, the hunger for goodness. He had faith in us, and even if his faith turns out to have been misplaced, even if we have abandoned him, he somehow endures, standing between us and our electrified antipathies and recriminations like the tank man of Tiananmen Square in a red sweater. He is a warrior, all right, because he is not just unarmed, outgunned, outnumbered. He is long gone, and yet he keeps up the fight. When I read that paragraph that you wrote, it makes me feel like, and maybe this isn't the best verb, but that Fred Rogers still haunts us. I don't mean
Sure.
I don't mean that verb as some sort of creepy verb or whatnot. But his
No, I know.
But,
I know.
But
I agree with you.
but his ghost lingers. And I think for those of the audience, we have lots of different people watching right now, but the majority of them are preachers. And I think that many of us preachers are fascinated by Fred Rogers because I see a lot of connection between what he did and his ministry and what we are called to do. When Fred, as you write, what initially compelled Fred to create his own television show was he was so dismayed and disgusted by the children's television programming of that day. Well, what was it that he hated about? I really can't use that verb with him, although I'm sure he felt hate. But what was it about the children's programming of the day that really irked him?
He, on the most basic level, he watched people throwing pies at each other on children's TV, grown men throwing pies at each other, and he was dismayed. I think dismayed is the best word to put it, because he felt the potential in the medium. He felt the potential in the medium to reach out to people and to connect people, and to, he was, Fred very rarely spoke explicitly in any arena about God, but he did speak often about what was sacred. And he believed that the space between the television screen and a child could be sacred space. And
he was doing virtual ministry before it was cool.
That's exactly right. And so when I wrote in the Atlantic piece a year ago that Fred has lost, that's what I was referring to. I wasn't referring that his battle, for kindness was lost. I was referring that specific mission, which he took upon himself, that profoundly countercultural mission, has not been. There is no one to follow him in it. There's lots of people doing good, but someone with that power and that audience doing good on that scale, we just don't have that. And I think of it all the time. I think of Fred all the time in terms of where we are with social media, and just how hostile and unfriendly social media really is. Even among friends.
Yeah.
People lose friends that they've had for 50 years.
How about family that they've had for 50
and
years,
family
too?
and exactly yeah. friends and family members and neighbors.
And the space. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
It's a very, we're in a very tough place, and I feel myself reaching for Fred. I feel myself. I'm very this way and that on prayer. But I when I pray, I often ask, in the spirit of Fred, what do I do now? What can we do? Where are we? And how can you follow his tracks when hatred is by far the most convenient response on social media, or anger, at least. Maybe not hatred, but anger at least.
Yeah, I think that we are living in such loud times, and you're right. Anger, which is usually the byproduct of fear. My child psychologist of a wife will remind me of that.
Yeah.
Is so pervasive right now that I think that many of us, when Fred saw this television program for children that was loud, profane, disrespectful, instead of adding to the noise, he stepped into that loud space. He stepped into that arena, and provided an alternative way of ministry that was subversive, as you say, countercultural. And he must have felt weary stepping into that space. And I think that for many of us preachers who are called to the pulpit week in and week out to our congregations in this particular time and place, we feel distraught. We feel like we are is there a place for the message of the gospel in such an ethos of hatred and racism and toxic masculinity and all these things that just seem to be so big and we feel so small? Is there a place for that gentle but ferocious love of
I
Mr.
mean, I
Rogers.
think that there, I think that there has to be, and I think that that is the message of Fred. I mean, it wasn't like, Fred lived in some halcyon era. He lived in the 70s,
Yeah.
80s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And let's face it, a lot of stuff was going down, and racism was at the time, it was the knee-jerk reaction of so many people, and there wasn't even anything said about it. So I mean, but I think that what Fred really had going for him was his faith in the ministry of example. I think that, I mean, Fred was a person who basically did the same thing every day of his life while being open to all sorts of different things. I mean, that show was crazy. I mean, it was open to surprises. I mean, whenever I see Fred, so there's obviously two movies that came out in the last 2 years, in 2018 and 2019, about Fred Rogers. One was the documentary, and one was the the live action movie. But in the documentaries, there's a lot of really, Won't You Be My Neighbor? There's a lot of really wonderful stuff. And the thing that stuns me again and again and again is when he gets into the cage with Coco the gorilla.
Yeah.
And Coco the gorilla
just
unties his shoes.
Yeah.
Because Coco Gorilla has been watching the Fred Rogers show
From her.
And she knows that he takes off his shoes. I mean, it is, you have no idea what's going to happen in that moment. And what happens, of course, is a moment of just, tremendous grace. But so Fred was this guy who did the exact same thing every moment or every day so that he could be open to every moment of the day. And that's who he was, and I mean, every morning he got up and prayed for people and wrote and read scripture and went to swim and swam for a mile and, went and, contacted friends and this and that. And, it was this life that he tried to reduce to its essence so that its essence would be one of grace. And I think that he didn't, I mean, he did it so that he didn't have to speak. He didn't have to argue. He was the argument.
Wow.
He
didn't have to argue. He was the argument.
Yeah.
I mean, that as a preacher, we are obsessed with words. You're a writer. I would imagine you are as well. But Fred taught us that it's about more than words. Words are important, absolutely important.
And he was, listen, I mean, I when I was writing the Atlantic piece, I found and uncovered all of his correspondence with me.
Yeah.
And he's a brilliant, brilliant writer. But I think that his writing was part of his arsenal of gestures. I think that his message was in his gestures as much as it was articulated in his writing. And I think his writing was a gesture as much as it was a collection of words. I mean, what he used his writing for was to connect with people, to communicate with people, to reach out to people. And he did that. I mean, his writing to me is it's just so freaking amazing. It really is. And in his writing to me, by the way, and thanks to some prodding from me, because I was interested, he is more of a theological bent than in any other arena that I know him in.
In his personal correspondence with you?
Yes, very much so.
What can you share more about that? What is the explicit theology of Mr. Rogers? Obviously, we got lots of implicit theology through the through the television show, but what struck you about the theology in his personal letters to you?
Well, I mean, I was very interested in having him prove to me that God was good and I was worthy of love. I mean, it was quite basic. It wasn't like, we were discussing the Pelagian heresy. I mean, here's my dog, by the way. This
Dex,
is
is it
my guy, Dexter.
Dexter, that's right. Hey, Dexter.
Yeah. And he just came in. He just barreled his way in here.
But that question, Tom, who hasn't asked those questions? Who haven't,
Right.
is God good?
Right.
Am I worthy of love?
Yeah.
So what would he tell you?
Yes. And he would, I mean, that's where his writing, was somehow gestural. It wasn't just like, gee, Tom, don't worry about it.
Hmm.
It was, gee, Tom, I wish I had it all, in front of me right now. And if I was smarter, I would. But hang on one second. I do have one thing that I have easily available to me. Are you there? Can
Yeah.
you see me? Okay.
No, are you trying to share your screen or something?
No, I'm just trying to find something. Hang on.
You're fine.
I do have some things that I can show you.
While Tom's looking for that, one of the things I love in his article is that you said that Mr. Rogers' email address was zzz143@aol.com. I always love that little detail, zzz, because he slept so well every night, and 143, of course, because I has one word or one letter, love has four letters, and U has three letters,
Right.
and of course, famously, he weighed 143 pounds every day of his adult life. And I just love how Fred Rogers seemed to find that kind of that quirky symbolism that he just found meaning in those little things, and they steered him for his life.
Let it never be said that he wasn't quirky.
Yeah.
he was quite quirky.
Yeah.
So. Okay, so last year, and I have this on my desktop on my computer, so it was easily available. But last year, when I was doing the Atlantic piece, one of the screenwriters for Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, Noah Harpster, sent me a photograph, screenshot, whatever you want to call it, of notes that he found in Fred's archive. That were in my folder of Fred's archive, notes that he wrote on journalism. And I'm going to read them to you. Journalists are human beings, not automatons, human beings, not stenographers. Journalists have a duty to let their outrage show through when they come across injustice. Journalists need to let their compassion show through for other people's suffering. And journalists need to let their wonder, show through when they witness the glory of life. They have so much responsibility to celebrate life, and they have as much responsibility to celebrate life and the goodness of it as they do to root out evil. And so that's
Wow.
So Fred has. If I could just show you these things, I mean, it's written in this. He had the most beautiful handwriting. He had a calligraphic hand,
Yeah.
and so it's written in this beautiful handwriting, and he clearly just dashed it off. And I keep that on my desktop just to remind me of what he was trying to get me to do and to be. And I mean, that's obviously not overtly, theological, but
You could just as easily call that the job description of a preacher.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
They really, in some ways we are both journalists and preachers. We are we're midwives of sorts. We receive something. In your case, whoever or whatever you're writing about, in the preacher's case, it's the biblical text. We receive this gift, and it is our job to to stand in wonder of it, to allow to ask questions of it, but just as importantly, to allow it to ask questions of us.
Yeah,
I think Fred did that
exactly.
so well, and then we cultivate it, we nourish it, but we don't own it.
Right. Right.
We pass it on. And I think Fred did that in his ministry. You know, Fred did not create the emotions of anger and joy and fear and gratitude, but he had this way of cultivating these truths, these goodness, this goodness in the midst of injustice, and to pass it along to us in a way that was just, God, just,
I mean, I
I
think
don't
that one
know.
of the interesting, I think that one of the interesting things about Fred is that anger looms over his work.
Interesting. Say more about that.
He is he was, and the movie captures that very, very well. A lot of
When he's at the piano,
Yeah, yeah,
bong,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Fred did not have an easy childhood,
He was
and
bullied a lot, wasn't
he was bullied a lot.
he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's really hard to be bullied a lot without coming out of that without some kind of anger. And a lot of his written work and his the dedication of his work was towards teaching children to find positive ways to
Mm.
express their feelings and their emotions. And I think that feelings and emotions. I knew him well enough to know that I think that anger dominated that. It wasn't just joy, it wasn't just
Mm.
love. I think that anger was the thing that he had to work through, and that's what he was working through. And so once again, I think that his ministry is very potent for us because it's
Yeah.
not anger free. It's just
No,
anger
goodness, no. I
positive.
mean, as somebody who did not feel seething anger could not write the words, "What do you do with the mad that you feel
Right,
when you feel so bad you could bite, when the
right,
whole wide world seems oh so wrong and nothing you do seems very right."
right.
Even to this day, sometimes when I am just absolutely seething in anger, I will start singing that song,
Yeah.
because you're right. Fred understood that we had the capacity to choose how we react to anger. I was preaching yesterday in the Revised Common Lectionary. It was the parable of the unforgiving servant, the
Hmm.
servant who's
Sure.
forgiven a huge amount, and then rather than pay it forward, he goes and finds somebody who owes him a very small amount, strangles him,
Right.
and says, and we talked about anger. I think about Fred Rogers whenever I think about the story of Cain and Abel. If you remember the story of Cain and Abel, Cain was so freaking mad at his brother Abel because he never measured up. God preferred Abel's offerings to Cain, and
Yes.
Cain was incensed. And we know the story that Cain killed Abel, but there's something that happens before that I find fascinating. Before Cain does it, God sits down with Cain and says, "Hey, I see that you're angry, but you have a choice with what you do." And God, I'm paraphrasing a little bit there, but God says to Cain, "Hey, I see what's happening, and you have a choice. There's an alternate way than killing." And obviously, Cain did not take that choice. But I think about Fred when I think about God and that story about God, about Fred saying to us, "Hey, you have emotions. It's anger is not a bad thing.
Right.
But what makes us human is our capacity to choose what we do." I mean, it's at the end of the song, "What do you do with the mad that you feel?" He says something like, "Isn't it nice to know that these feelings are really mine and that I
Yeah,
can
that's right.
choose
Yeah.
what to do?" And he
Yeah.
says, "What do you do when the mad that you feel? Do you, he lists off a bunch of nonviolent things. Do you pound some clay or some dough, or what is it? gather your friends for a game of tag and see how fast they
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
I feel like we've lost that. I feel like I've lost that. And part of it is just social media, because it's so easy when you're pissed off just to comment and boom. It's
Boom. Yeah, sure.
and it's the easier option. I know I'm guilty of it. But just to practice the pause and go, hey, I'm feeling pissed off as hell. And this is my feeling. And I need to spend some time with this feeling before I do anything about it. And that's hard as hell, Tom.
Yeah. I mean,
it's hard
listen,
as, yeah.
and you said before that anger comes from fear.
Yep.
I mean, I'll tell you flat out. I mean, I am really afraid of what's going to go down in this country over the next 2 months. I just
I am
am.
too.
And because I don't think that we know. And, you know, if there is violence done from either side, you know, it's going to be really hard to say, well, gee, you know, won't you be my neighbor? And all, like, you know, where do we stand with Fred's teachings then? You know, and but I think the thing about Fred that I think that we're really trying to get at is that, you know, I think that a lot of people like to think of Fred as this sort of neutered kind of being, that he was, you know, not, you know, by an example of, you know, when people looking at him in terms of what he was not rather than what he was, and, you know, that he kept away from, you know, dark and deep waters, when in fact, I mean, he lived there. You know, he lived in those waters, but he, you know, he found a way to swim. And
Actually, what somebody just asked a question in the comment section about burnout, about us feeling, those of us pastors that are in those dark, deep waters, as you say, as Fred was. And one of the questions from Brendan here is, do you think Mr. Rogers ever felt burnout? Did he ever talk to you about that? Or did you ever get the sense that there were days that he just didn't feel like he was up to the task? I mean, what do you?
yeah, I
What
think
do you
that there
think
were
about
many
that?
I think that there were many of those days. I mean, I didn't really see them because Fred was not, you know, I had a chance to, you know, to look firsthand at Fred's example, but I didn't get much past that. You know, I mean, Fred was not really particularly interested in opening his soul to me. He showed me, you know, he tried to show me my soul. So
Hmm.
I didn't really, you know, get that out of Fred. Like, you know, gee, I'm angry today, but you could see it. And I think that, you know, that Joanne is, you know, is quite frank, you know, about all that. But I do think that Fred had like a secret weapon against burnout. And that was, he was so willing to be, you know, for a guy who was as driven by routine and discipline as he was, he had this capacity to be surprised and to
Hmm.
allow himself to be surprised. That, you know, I remember when I went to the athletic club with him, you know, there was the guy who was the towel guy, was, you know, he was autistic. And, you know, and Fred had known him for years, and he would just come right up to you, you know, and Fred made sure to introduce me to him, you know, and this guy comes up to me and he was like, "Who are you?" You know, he was just like, no, you know, no filter whatsoever. And I said, "Well, you know, I'm Fred's friend." "Are you a priest?" "No, I'm not a priest." "You should be a priest." And then, and just Fred's face lit up, you know, so much. And he was like, you know, and he was like, "Did you hear that, Tom?" You know, and it was so funny, but I mean, it was very funny to be, because it was like everything that happened when I was with Fred seemed to happen by Fred's will, you know.
Hmm.
So of course, the guy comes up to me and says, you know, "You should be a priest." And but at the same time, just watching the childlike, joy
Mm.
that Fred thought was as much part of his ministry as the example of, and like, how to find a healthy role for your
Mm.
emotions.
Yesterday, when you and I chat on the phone a few minutes yesterday, I shared with you something that I'm learning as a preacher, as a pastor, as a human being trying to navigate this world that we're living in, is that uh, the antidote to despair is wonder,
I agree.
and wonder leads to gratitude.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
gratitude leads to wonder. I don't know, but that capacity just to constantly be able to say this is something new, this is something wonderful, this is something that I'm learning. Children get that because everything's new as a child.
Right,
But you're a
right.
tiny little child, and the world is so friggin' huge, and we forget what that's like. Except Fred didn't. And I
He
think
never
that
did.
that's, I think,
He never did. I mean, I do believe that he carried a burden,
yeah. And I think
but
that's why, do you think that's why there's this resurgence in appreciation of and fascination with Fred Rogers right now? I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that Donald Trump gets elected, and we really descend into this just exhausting place of so much pain and so much fear. And now we look back at, the ghost of Mr. Rogers visits us again. And I think a lot of us I grew up with Mr. Rogers. I grew up, and I was born in 88. So I remember watching Mr. Rogers. Is I think some of us now that are so scared, I know I'm filled with fear. I want to get back to that sense of wonder. I think
yeah,
I
I
think
mean,
Fred calls us back to that, don't you think?
he does. But it's an interesting thing, because I mean, like, the minute you said, if Trump gets elected again, there's a dissent. I mean, the thing that I find, and I'm going to use the word that I want to contest, but the thing that I find unforgivable, and I use that word a lot with Trump, is that he has, at this moment when this country is teetering on the brink, he has decided to double down on divisiveness in order to try to win re-election. And I've certainly never experienced anything like that in my lifetime. And but that question, I mean, what is unforgivable, and what is my right to be even able to say that. I'll never forgive Trump for. You asked me yesterday, how do I think that Fred would contend with Donald Trump? Well, I think we have partial answer in that Joanne came out last week and spoke quite openly about him, that she thought that he was psychologically ill, that he was sick. And I do agree with that. But does that present all the more reason to forgive him? And so a lot of the language that we associate with Fred, kindness, forgiveness, wonder, all those things. I mean, it's not just Fred's lessons that are being tested right now. His toolkit
Mhm.
is being tested. It's not just, I mean, the very concepts for which he stood, not just him, but the concepts for which he stood are being tested.
So when you first met Fred, he prodded you about your childhood, as he probably did with many adults. He was able to see the child in all of us because he remembered the child within him. I think Daniel Tiger is the epitome
Yeah. Yeah.
of Fred as a child. But
It is.
so if he sat down with Donald Trump, you think he would try to find the child in Donald Trump?
I do. I do. I think he would do that, because I think that, number one, he did it with, I mean, he was a creature of consistency, and he did it with everybody. It was his superpower. So I can't see him. I can't see him not doing it and making an exception for this guy, no matter what he really thought about him. But I do think that he would try to minister to him and just say, what's wrong? Why are you so angry? What happened to you? And and I think that he would. You saw there's the very famous episode caught on camera where he's speaking to the senator from the state of, is it from Illinois or from Pennsylvania? I forget which.
I can't remember.
But anyway, he has a guy coming after him in his face, and Fred asked for that moment, and the song that does it are the lyrics for "The Mad That You Feel."
Yeah. I think the reason that Fred Rogers haunts me is because he demands so much of us. And that's one of the things I loved in I can't remember if it was your 98 article or your article last year, where you say it's much easier to think of Fred Rogers as a nice guy.
Yeah, that was last year.
Than a demanding one.
Yeah.
And I think that he does ask a lot of us, and I'm grateful as I'm teaching and preaching and trying to navigate this world. I'm grateful that Fred Rogers is haunting me. And I'll give you an example of, he haunted me today. Okay. So I went to Costco today because it's soup season. It's going to be soup chili. So I went to go get, all the garbanzo beans and diced tomatoes and all that stuff, because I'm all about crock pots. Anyway, so I was walking out of Costco today, and I saw a man with a mask on it was a MAGA mask. It said "Make America Great Again." And as I passed him, I thought, I'm not going to repeat what I thought about this man. I will simply say it was a very ungracious, horrible thought that I had. And because of that, just that whenever I see that phrase, I'm tricked, anyways. And then I realized, I got into my car, I looked in the rear view mirror, and I realized what shirt I was wearing today, which is this shirt right here.
Right.
And I had a moment of guilt, of irony, of just wondering of how that gut reaction for me was just happened so quick, and that
Nia's here, so
hey Nia.
Pastor Stephen.
Hey Nia, good to see ya. That Fred was able to train himself to initially see the child, and I was just wondering, what if I was able to train myself to see the child in that man before I have that thought? Now, granted, I didn't act on it, but still, that anger manifests itself in other ways, and I think Fred was able to do that, and Fred didn't come up with that, though. I was reading.
No, not at all.
I was reading a few weeks ago. I was reading John Lewis's memoir, "Walking with the Wind," and he goes into detail about talking about the practices of nonviolence and the work that he did with SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And when they were training to do protests, they trained themselves to act nonviolently. And in the book, John Lewis says that one of the core principles of, when someone is beating you or snubbing out a lit cigarette on the back of your neck or whatever, that you have to train yourself to literally visualize that person as an infant, as
Mhm.
the infants that they used to be, pure and innocent as you are, and that if you're able to visualize that in your head, that is how you resist the very human urge to lash out again. And I think Fred knew that, and I think he passed that along to us. And that's a lesson that we're haunted by, because the opportunities abound these days, do they not?
Yeah, Fred's example, is haunting. Um, I am I am very aware of how much he gave me, and because I'm aware of that, I mean, I think a lot of, gee, Fred, what do you expect of me? What's my next move? And it's a that's a conversation I have with myself, an awful lot. Because he and I do, I mean, listen, I mean, you talk about John Lewis, you talk about Fred Rogers. I mean, we're having a pastoral conversation, so I might as well say it. But I mean, I think that, I mean, a lot of that is, I'm sure, not so different than what the disciples thought when they were around Jesus. Like, what do you expect from me?
Mm.
And I don't want to compare Fred to Jesus. Obviously, Fred's a man, and so is John Lewis, and in my opinion, so is Jesus. But I mean, and you say, when you read the Gospels, you sense their confusion
Yeah.
all the time.
Yep.
What does this guy want from me?
Mm.
And the fact that those men are able to instill that confusion, I mean, it's kind of a wonderful thing. That confusion is not a bad thing.
Mm. Yeah, I think that for those of us that are teaching and preaching these days, we are it can be a tricky thing, because we have colleagues here in the Clergy Emergency League, who have literally been accosted by their congregations, or by congregants, literally for just reading the gospel, just reading the words of Christ pisses off some people these days, to the
Hmm.
point that
Wow.
clergy have gotten pushback, simply because Jesus was a socialist, or Jesus was a yada yada yada,
Wow.
you know. And I think that we are just in this space where,
Wow.
as preachers, the message of Jesus Christ just seems such a dangerous thing right now, and it's hard to preach the message of Jesus Christ into a space where that same message has been co-opted by the so-called evangelical right wing of Christianity.
Yeah.
And we see, I think what incensed us the most, that made us so fearsome, was when he, used violent means on peaceful protesters to a church unannounced, and he held up a Bible. And we see that, and we know that Trump's followers just loved that, because
Mm.
they see
Yeah.
him as a
Yeah.
godly man that God literally sent to
Well,
save this country.
they see him as God's warrior.
And
That
yeah,
he's the very, his imperfections are actually the signature of God, which is just, that he couldn't, given his flaws, he couldn't be where he is
sure.
without God's imprimatur.
And I think for those of us who are preaching these days, that it's a dangerous thing to to preach prophetically, when many of our congregants, have bought into this narrative. And I think, I think that Fred Rogers, I think he knew that some people found him laughable. I think he knew that
Yeah.
some people found his version of 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 masculinity as just weird and unthinkable and weak, and yet that did not deter his message. Um,
No, not at all.
he had this sort of, I think I think you and I were talking yesterday about how Mr. Rogers taught us about emotional resiliency.
Hmm.
Um, and I think we all need that right now. Those that are called to teach and preach, those that are called to write words of truth. And I'm just wondering, what do you do as somebody who has learned from Fred so much? How do you stay emotionally resilient? You personally, Tom Junod. These days, we started off our conversation yesterday on the phone. How are you doing, Tom? And you said, Stephen, it's a
Yeah,
tough world right now. What are some practices that you do that keep you that build up your emotional resiliency?
that's interesting. You know, I try to stay I try to stay physical. I try to, like when I was in Shelter Island this summer. I mean, the thing about Shelter Island this summer, it was crowded in that there was tons of people there from New York City, and yet it was like abandoned. There was,
Hmm.
I mean, I would walk around at night. There was nobody out. There was nothing open. There was nobody out, and yet, I tried to be out. I mean, I think that Fred was, he was very attuned to the fact that, you found God in places where you don't expect to. And to me, the thing that, I mean, you find God in the dark. You find God in silence, and you find Him in other people. So, you know, during the lockdown, I've a lot of people I know who have experienced a lot of loss, and so I try to, I make them chickens. I've been just, kind of every week I've been, bringing chickens over to people's, and I just, I try to connect with people even just through what we're doing now. I try to connect with people, on Zoom, and to, and to laugh, with the people I know who have experienced really extreme loss. Sometimes they're not particularly interested in some guy calling up and saying, "How are you?" They're interested in just talking about the same shit that they've been talking about forever, and that great privilege to just talk about nothing with friends. And so, those are the things that I try to do. I mean, I have a lot of friends, and you know they really keep me going. And I mean, I'm lucky enough to have a lot of friends right where I'm sitting. I'm, my wife, my daughter, and big Dexter, my dog. I mean, I wrestle with Dexter every night, and he expects that because I'm the other dog in the house. And so he expects me to come over and mess with him, and so I do. And those are the things. It's nothing's big, but I try to do that. I'm also trying to write this book on my dad, which
Mhm.
is very, very hard. And um and I've kept at it, even though I went, and my first draft was not particularly successful. And
Mm.
so now I'm kind of back at it. And I found the voice for the book when I got sick over the summer. I thought I had COVID for sure. It turned out to be a tick bite, but I was sick as a dog. I mean, I was shaking so badly I couldn't take my own temperature.
Mm.
And during that time, I found the voice for my book. And you just, I mean, one of Fred's okay, guys, here's my message, because Fred's the thing that he lived by, and we talked about his willingness to be open to things. What he always said to his friends, especially skeptical friends, was, "You see, you never know." And that's, that's what he said, when my story came out, the story that his major domo, Bill Eisler, did not want him to cooperate with. He looked at Bill and said, "See, Bill, you never know."
Wow.
And I think that,
Because he did Bill Eisner did not want you to interview
no, he
Fred,
thought
right?
Fred was crazy.
Because he thought that you were going to treat him the way that you treated Kevin Spacey or
Well, I mean,
whatever.
listen, all of my work at that time was really, really tough.
Yeah.
It was really, really, it was definitely, I took pride in saying things about people that nobody else would say.
Hmm.
And that kind of drove a lot of it. And, Fred taught me how to say something else.
Wow. Wow.
And but the idea that you never know is something of a, I too am willing to be surprised.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I was about to say to say you never know is it's an acknowledgement that you are open to surprise, that you're open to learning, that you're open to, and that's something that I think we need to be holding on to right now. I want to ask you another. Actually, I want to open up some questions
Sure.
from our commenters. There's a bit of a lag, so right now, if you're watching right now, and there is a question that you would like to ask Tom, I can't promise that we'll get to all of them because I do realize that we're kind of we're past an hour, but we're going to hang out here for a little bit. So if you have any questions for Tom, please type them into the comments section.
I'm going to take a break and get a glass of water while we're doing this.
Perfect.
Okay.
All right, go ahead and do that. So while Tom's getting hydrated, if y'all have any questions for Tom, specifically about his relationship with Fred Rogers, or how the ministry of Fred Rogers intersects with our calling for those of us who are teachers and preachers, go ahead and put those in now. So while people are
I'm on Dexter's bed right now, by the way.
Are you serious? It's very nice of him to loan it to you. While we're giving people a chance to type in some questions, I joined a club that you are currently in, that you've been in for some time, and that's the Club of Parenthood. Your daughter Nia is a junior, I think.
She's 17 years old.
17. Trisha, say hi to Tom.
Hi, Trish. Hi, how you doing?
You can sit and join us if you want. Yeah. And we just had our first child.
I know.
Who is she sleeping? She's sleeping. Anyway, so if you could, I'm sure you and Nia have talked about Fred. What is one thing about Fred? If there was just one thing about Fred that you could pass on to Nia, that you hope that she embodies as she continues to grow into the young woman that she is. What is one thing that that you have tried to instill within her that you learned from Fred?
I can't hear.
Oh. Hold on, Tom, just a second. We're having some Hold on, Tom, just a second. We're having some technical difficulties. There you go. Okay, we can hear you now.
I mean,
go ahead.
Our whole world is designed to force people into snap judgments. It's very black and white. There's no gray. And I mean, I even like a lot of high school students, even Nia's idealism can be stated very harshly, because that's the way the world is right now. I mean, I've people on my Facebook page, like there are people who are express very, very, to me, they're on the right side, but they express some of their opinions extremely harshly. And, what I try to communicate to Nia is that you never know. You never know what it's like to be somebody else. And, try to understand that before you react. I'm always trying to teach Nia to respond and not react. And that is, I think, one of the things that Fred, you know, taught me, and the thing that I think that Fred, the thing that Fred has taught me as a parent, and because I think your original question was like, what do you want to pass on to Nia from Fred? And, so you never know is I think the thing that I really want to pass on to her. But the thing that Fred passed on to me as a parent is you were a child once too. I mean, that is to me just an incredible, it's like a lot of Fred, it's really simple and it's really profound. Mm. And, there are just, many, many moments as a parent where, I am, why can't my daughter do this at this moment? And you realize, and you think back and you're like, okay, well, when I was 16, could I do that? Of course not. So, my whole basis for judgment is, has to be revised. And so those are to me the main things.
Yeah. I know what is one thing of Fred that you that we would like to pass on to Hazel Grace?
I think it's noticing the little things.
Yeah,
one of my favorite things about him is, when he takes the stairs on the show, sometimes he'll go up and down them a few different times, or he'll button his sweater differently, or he'll laugh at the way he threw his shoe.
Yeah.
Or and we know that the reason that he commented about the fish was for a child who is blind, but like just those little things, like hanging out with my fish and this is great.
Yeah.
The little, that there's so much joy in those little moments, and they get hidden so easily.
Yeah, that's what we were kind of talking about before, is like, his gestures. I mean, wonder is really, he stood for wonder as much as he stood for kindness. Mm. And I mean, a lot of people, when you ask for them, okay, well, we're going to talk about Fred, so of course we're going to talk about kindness. But kindness is not, it's not easy to achieve. Yeah. And I think that Fred, the thing that's really great about Fred is that he gave you tools to achieve it. Mm. It wasn't like he was just saying, go on out there, kid, and be kind, because that's hard to do.
Yeah.
But I think that he had very, very kind of specific ways that he taught people to be kind. What do you, pound your hand if you're mad or whatever, Yeah.
So we have a few questions here. Tony Jackson asked this question. She said, a student told me that they didn't think it would be possible for someone like Fred to be successful in today's world. And I thought that was so sad. Do you think the world would be receptive of Fred today?
Yeah, and that's not to say that, Fred wouldn't meet more resistance in today's world than he even did in his, and he met a lot of it. But I have faith that humanity, both, is pretty good at producing Freds when we need them, and that humanity is also, no matter what, will have its ear tuned to that message. Once again, do I think it's going to be easy? No, but I think that there are there will be people that come out of nowhere and speak with the authority of kindness.
Mm.
And that's, of course, the thing that Fred had. He wasn't just like a nice guy. He wasn't that. He had the authority of human kindness. And the authority of human kindness goes way, way, way back.
Yeah.
And it's a tree with really, really deep roots. So I think that there could be a Fred today.
A colleague of mine, Maxwell Muska, asked this, and he's a fellow Presbyterian pastor, says, how do you think clergy can best embody Fred's legacy in their preaching and interaction with others? So specifically for clergy, what do you think? How can we best embody Fred's message?
I mean, the thing that Fred did, his great genius, was that he found a secular language to express sacred things. Right? I mean, so the thing, like, his signature line is, "You are special, and there's never going to be another person like you ever, ever again." And a lot of people look at that as, oh, gee, Fred Rogers created participation trophies. That's, the whole idea that everybody is special is what's haunting us right now, all this privilege and entitlement. And what he was really trying to say was God loves you. But he found a different way to say it, and he found a way that he could say it to anyone and everyone. And I think that that was the genius of him, and it's a genius that I would love to see come out of the church, because for the church to say Jesus loves you, I mean, it's a powerful statement, but not everybody is open to that statement. And you are special, or some version of that can draw a lot of people and do a lot of good. So,
Patsy Ann Johnson asks, what would Fred say about dealing with climate change and species extinction?
I think that Fred would say that the wonder that is grace. I mean, I think that that Fred used wonder in the way that the promise of that he used the promise of grace. I think that they were the same for him. And I think that Fred would say that the wonder of that enables us to sort of go through and be good servants is predicated on the wonder of the natural world. I don't think there is wonder without the natural world. So, and I think that Fred would agree with that.
Yeah.
Well, Tom, as we bring our time to a close here, one of the most famous moments of Mr. Rogers' life in his later years was when he was accepting that big television award. I can't remember what it was, and during his acceptance speech, he paused and for it felt like an hour, but it was only like 10 seconds or something like that. To ask people to stop and think about someone, and correct me if this is not the correct verbiage, but someone who has loved you into existence.
Loved you into being.
Loved you into being. Thank you. Think about somebody who has loved you into being, it's disarming to be told to be quiet these days.
Yeah.
So I would like for us to close our time together by doing just that, and not just the three of us here, but whoever is also watching live on Facebook. We're gonna pause. Let's give it 30 seconds.
Okay.
30
And
seconds.
Fred would always hold up his watch and say,
That's right.
and I'll count.
And I'll count, yes. So what we're going to do is we're going to pause for 30 seconds and just take a moment to dwell on someone who has loved you into being. And I'm going to invite the three of us to share. And if you watching at home would like to, after the 30 seconds, you got to take 30 seconds, to type in the comments somebody who has loved you into being and why it is that way. So let's do that.
Okay.
Thank you for doing that with us. Trisha, who's somebody who loved you into being? Who were you thinking about?
I was thinking about my parents because becoming a parent has made me think more about growing up and my parents and how much work that they had to do to make my life happen, and the worry and the intention and the all of it. I feel all of that now, but for somebody else. And so thinking about who that person was for me, and just thinking, wow, that's a lot of care that it took. So
A lot, right?
oh man, so much.
Yeah.
I was thinking about a man, an elderly man in the church when I was growing up. His name was Albert Shaw. And every Sunday he would walk around the church before or after the worship service. And he had a paper bag that was filled with little 5-packs of the yellow juicy fruit gum, the yellow juicy fruit gum. And all of us children, one by one, before or after the service, would find him, and he would just sweep us up into his arms, and he would give us a pack of the juicy fruit gum, and he would just whisper to us, do you want to know something? And we all knew the answer, but we always said, no, tell me. And he would just say, God loves you, and so do I. And he did this every Sunday with all the children in the church. And I didn't even, I've never been a gum chewer. I didn't even care for the gum.
Juicy fruit tastes pretty good, though.
It does.
I
That's
don't
a
know,
good choice.
I'm weird, but
About 10 seconds, it tastes good.
about 10 seconds, yeah. So I didn't go for the gum. I went for that reminder because we all need it. And the fact that he took that time to individually lift up and care and hold every child, that's a very potent memory for me. Tom, how about you?
I was originally, I was going to try to think of my dad, but that wasn't working right then. So I thought of Fred, since we're doing this, and I still can't believe that, that Fred saw something in me, and that I'm doing this, that I'm, talking about his legacy. It seems like, one of the great unaccountable gifts of my life. I don't even understand it, to be quite honest with you. I don't understand how it happened, how I got here. It's beyond understanding. But when I think of Fred, I think of, then thinking of Fred got me into thinking about my dad. because they couldn't have been more different. But you know, my dad taught me my dad taught me a lot about joy, and a lot about, you know, wonder, and you know, him and Fred were very, very different, but they were similar that way. So
Well, Tom, thank you.
this is great.
This has been wonderful. Your time and your presence is a gift for me. Tricia and I have been blessed by our relationship with you and your family, and on behalf of all the folks watching on Facebook right now, we are grateful for sharing your thoughts and experiences, and being our neighbor. The ghost of Fred Rogers continues to linger.
Without a doubt, in a great way, and still makes his ghostly demands. So
Well, that is something that we need, because for the months ahead of us, um, we need to be filled with His Spirit. So so we have come to the end of our time together. So thank you all, for everyone who's been watching.
it's great seeing you guys again.
Yeah. So we're
I
gonna
miss you, and I'm so happy for you. I'm so pleased for you.
thank you.